The man history remembers as Kim Il-sung came into the world on April 15, 1912, born Kim Sung-ju in the quiet village of Nam-ni, a place now folded into the city of Pyongyang. In those days, the land was under Japanese rule, called Chosen, and life for many families was marked by hardship and the constant presence of foreign power. Kim's father, Kim Hyung-jik, belonged to the Jeonju Kim clan, a lineage stretching back 30 generations to King Tae-so, said to trace to King Gyeong-sun of the Silla dynasty in the 10th century. Though the name carried echoes of ancient royalty, by the 19th century the family had fallen on hard times, no longer close to palaces, but living simply, working hard to keep body and soul together. Kim's grandfather had met Western Christian missionaries who arrived on the peninsula from the 1860s onward. He embraced Presbyterianism, a faith of discipline, community, and hope, and passed it to his son. Kim Hyung-jik carried that belief quietly, raising his children with the same values. Many family members studied in missionary schools, gaining education that opened doors even when money was scarce. His mother, Kong Pon-suk, was the gentle strength of the home. She and Kim Hyung-jik had several children, including 2 younger sons, Kim Yong-ju, who lived to over 100 and passed only in 2021, and Kim Chul-ju, who later died fighting against Japanese rule. The household was modest, rice fields outside, prayers inside, family voices rising together in the evenings. Faith was not distant, it was lived, in kindness to neighbors, in trust during difficult days, in the belief that something greater watched over them. Those early years held the scent of earth after rain, the sound of hymns in the small house, the feeling of safety in a mother's care and a father's steady hand. The boy who would one day rule a nation first learned the world through simple things: family meals, stories of ancestors, the comfort of shared belief when life pressed hard. It touches the heart to think of such beginnings. We all start in places like that, homes where parents give everything so children can have more, where faith and love build the first walls against the world's troubles. Kim's family, though poor in material things, was rich in the things that last: loyalty, endurance, the quiet hope that tomorrow could be better. Even then, the land around them was changing. Japanese control grew tighter, resentment stirred in many hearts, but in Nam-ni, the days were still filled with the small rhythms of family life. The heritage of kings may have been far away, but the heritage of a faithful, hard-working home was close, and that, more than any crown, shaped the boy who grew up there. We may not follow the same paths later in life, but we can feel tenderness for those first chapters, for mothers and fathers who teach us to stand, for villages that cradle big dreams, for the faith that carries us when the road is uncertain. Let's carry that gentle memory forward as we walk through his story, thankful for the roots that ground us all.
Let's pause now and look with gentle eyes at the faith that ran like a quiet river through Kim's early family life, the Christian roots that gave them strength and the struggles that tested it deeply. Kim Hyung-jik, the father, had grown up in a home already touched by the Presbyterian message brought by missionaries from Scotland and America. His own father, Kim's grandfather, had met these strangers who spoke of a loving God, of forgiveness, of hope beyond earthly hardship. He listened, believed, and chose to follow that path. Presbyterianism, with its clear teachings on personal responsibility, community care, and trust in divine justice, became part of the family soul. This faith was not something distant or formal. It lived in daily prayers, in Bible stories told by lamplight, in hymns sung softly when the day's work was done. The missionaries had also opened schools, and many in the Kim family, including the children, received education there. They learned to read scripture, to write, to think about right and wrong. Those lessons were a gift in a time when so many had little chance to learn. Yet the family remained poor. The old clan name carried echoes of kings, but the reality was simple labor, careful saving, and trust that God would provide. Kang Pan Suk, Kim's mother, walked beside her husband in this faith. She kept the home a place of peace, meals shared, children comforted, prayers offered for strength. The household was not large or wealthy, but it was held together by love and belief. Several children grew up under that roof, learning early that life could be hard, but faith could make it bearable. They heard the same verses repeated: trust in the Lord, love your neighbor, endure with hope. The struggles were real and constant. Japanese rule pressed heavier each year. Taxes took more, land was claimed, Korean ways were pushed aside. The family felt the weight, not just poverty, but the loss of freedom to live as Koreans, to speak their language freely, to honor their past without shame. Many neighbors whispered of resistance, but open talk was dangerous. Arrests happened quietly, families broken apart. The Kims lived carefully, yet their faith gave them courage to keep their heads high. In those small acts, a prayer before sleep, a Bible verse shared at table, kindness shown despite hardship, the children absorbed something lasting. They learned that true strength is not in power or wealth, but in holding to what is right, even when the world makes it hard. Kim Song-ju, the boy who would become Kim Il-sung, carried those early impressions: a father's steady belief, a mother's gentle care, the quiet defiance of holding faith under foreign rule. It touches the heart to think of such homes. We remember our own families, the parents who prayed through lean times, who taught us to stand firm in what we believe, who showed that love and faith can outlast any storm. Kim's early life was shaped in that same light, poor in things the world counts, rich in the things that endure. The Christian roots did not make life easy, but they gave meaning to the struggle. They reminded the family that justice would come, that God saw the oppressed, that endurance was part of the journey. Those lessons stayed with the boy, woven into whatever path he later chose. We may not walk the same roads, but we can feel tenderness for those beginnings, from mothers who comfort, fathers who teach, homes where faith is the strongest wall against trouble. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the roots of belief that help us face whatever comes.
Let's now turn our thoughts to a moment that stirred the hearts of many Koreans, including the young Kim family. The March 1st movement of 1919, a cry for freedom that echoed far beyond its days and left a lasting mark on the boy who would grow into Kim Il-sung. In early 1919, Kim was only 7 years old, still a child playing in Nam Lee village, listening to family prayers and stories. But the world around him was changing in ways that even a child could feel. The Great War in Europe had ended, and U.S. President Woodrow Wilson had spoken of a new hope, self-determination for nations, the right of peoples to choose their own paths. Those words traveled across oceans, reaching Korea like a distant promise. Korea had been under Japanese rule for nearly a decade. Its name changed, its language pushed aside, its people treated as subjects rather than equals. Resentment had grown quietly, like roots under soil, waiting for a chance to break through. Then came the death of former Emperor Gojong in January 1919. Many believed the Japanese had poisoned him, a final insult to a proud people. Grief turned to anger, and anger turned to action. On March 1st, thousands gathered across the country, students, ordinary citizens, religious leaders, reading a Declaration of Independence. They marched peacefully, waving homemade flags, singing songs of freedom, calling for Korea to be its own nation again. No weapons, no violence, just voices raised in hope. The movement spread quickly. Seoul, Pyongyang, villages like Namli. People from all walks joined. Christians, Buddhists, farmers, teachers, united in the simple wish to live free. The Japanese response was swift and harsh. Troops moved in, protests were crushed, thousands arrested, many killed. Yet the memory of those days did not die. The March 1st movement became a flame that refused to go out. It showed Koreans they could stand together, that the longing for independence was shared by young and old, city and village. In churches and schools, in homes like the Kims, people spoke of it in whispers, a day when ordinary people dared to dream aloud. For the Kim's family, the movement touched close. His father, Kim Hyung-jik, already opposed to Japanese rule, felt the stirrings deeply. The Presbyterian faith they held taught justice and dignity, and the movement's call for freedom echoed those beliefs. The family heard the stories, peaceful marchers beaten, leaders imprisoned, yet the spirit unbroken. It planted a seed in the boy's heart, the idea that a people could rise, that silence was not the only answer to oppression. Years later, when Kim looked back, he would speak of March 1st as a turning point, not just for the nation, but for his own awakening. The movement showed courage could come from ordinary places, that even children could feel the pull of something larger. In the Kim home, faith and resistance blended quietly, prayers for justice, stories of freedom, the belief that God saw the suffering and would one day make it right. It touches the heart to think of those days. We remember moments in our own histories when hope rose against hardship, when people gathered for a cause greater than themselves, when voices joined in song or prayer and refused to be silenced. March 1st was such a moment for Korea. Peaceful, brave, heartbreaking, yet full of enduring light. For a 7-year-old boy, it was not politics yet. It was feeling, a sense that the world could be unfair, but also that people could stand against it. His family's Christian roots gave shape to that feeling, love for neighbor, hope in justice, trust that endurance would win in the end. We may not agree with every path that followed, but we can feel tenderness for the child who watched his people rise, for the family that taught him dignity in dark times, for the movement that reminded a nation it still had a voice. Let's carry that gentle memory forward as we continue his story, thankful for the moments when hope refuses to fade and faith lights the way through struggle. Let's now walk with gentle steps into a time of hard choices and quiet courage, the exile of the Kim family to Manchuria, and the growing anti-Japanese sentiment that shaped their days and the boy's early heart. By 1920, when Kim Song-ju was 8 years old, life under Japanese rule had become too heavy to bear in silence. The occupation tightened like a slow hand. Korean names were replaced with Japanese ones. Schools taught loyalty to the emperor. Land and resources were taken for Japan's needs. Families whispered of arrests, of neighbors disappearing for speaking too freely. In villages like Namni, the air carried both the scent of rice fields and the weight of lost freedom. Kim Hyung-jik, the father, had long opposed Japanese domination. His Presbyterian faith taught him to stand for justice, and he could no longer watch his children grow up in a land where being Korean meant living second. Like thousands of others, patriots, teachers, ordinary parents, the family decided to leave. They joined a quiet stream of exiles crossing into Manchuria, northeastern China, seeking a place where Korean could still be spoken, where children could learn without bowing to foreign flags. The journey was not easy. Borders were watched, possessions few, the road long and uncertain. They left behind the familiar village, the small house where prayers had been said each night, the fields their hands had worked. Yet they went with the same love that had always guided them, the desire to protect their children, to give them room to breathe freely, to keep their heritage alive. In Manchuria, life began again in new soil. The family settled in areas where Korean communities had formed, places where schools still taught in Korean, where churches held services in the old way, where people gathered to remember their homeland. Kim Hyung-jik continued his quiet work against Japanese rule, connecting with others who shared his views. The home remained a place of faith, Bible readings, hymns, prayers for Korea's freedom. Kang Pan-suk kept the family close, cooking simple meals, comforting the children when homesickness came, teaching them that strength is found in holding to what is right. For the boy, these years were a time of listening and feeling. He heard stories of the March 1st movement, of people who had marched for independence and paid dearly. He saw his father's resolve, his mother's steady care, and began to understand that freedom was not given, it was something people had to protect, sometimes at great cost. Anti-Japanese sentiment grew naturally in such a place, not as hatred, but as a deep longing to live as Koreans, to speak their language, to honor their past without shame. Manchuria offered breathing room, but not safety. Japanese influence reached across the border, spies watched, arrests happened. Yet in those communities, hope lived on. Churches and schools became centers of quiet resistance, where faith and patriotism blended. The family prayed for their homeland, for justice, for a day when Korea could be free again. It touches the heart to think of such exiles. We remember families in our own histories who left home for a better chance, crossing borders, starting over, holding tight to faith and love when everything familiar was left behind. The Kim family's move was one of those journeys, painful, brave, driven by the deepest wish to shield their children and keep their spirit whole. In those Manchurian years, the boy absorbed lessons deeper than any schoolbook, that oppression can take land but not heart, that faith can light the darkest road, that a people's longing for freedom does not die easily.
his father's quiet opposition, his mother's gentle strength, these were the daily teachings that stayed with him. We may not follow the same paths later, but we can feel tenderness for the child in exile, for the parents who chose hardship over surrender, for the faith that sustained them when home was far away. Let's carry that soft understanding forward as we continue his story, grateful for the courage it takes to leave everything behind in the name of hope.
Let's now turn our gentle attention to a moment of quiet significance in Kim's young life, the time around 1935 when he chose to set aside his birth name, Kim Song-ju, and began calling himself Kim Il-sung, the name by which history would remember him. By his early 20s, Kim had already walked a long road: exile in Manchuria, school in Jilin, arrest and imprisonment, deepening ties to communist circles. These experiences had hardened him, sharpened his resolve, and filled him with a sense of purpose. The Japanese grip on Korea remained tight, their influence spreading into Manchuria, and the fight for independence felt both urgent and distant. In those years of guerrilla life, among comrades in the hills and forests, names sometimes carried weight beyond the everyday. Kim Il-sung means Kim becomes the sun, a name that evokes light, warmth, rising power, the promise of a new day. It was not chosen lightly. In the resistance movement, many adopted noms de guerre, names that spoke of hope, strength, or rebirth. For Kim, this choice marked a turning point. He was no longer just the son of Kim Hyung-jik, the boy from Namni village. He was stepping into a larger role, one he believed could bring light to his oppressed people. The name carried echoes of the faith he had known in childhood. In Presbyterian teachings, light and sun often symbolized divine guidance, truth breaking through darkness, hope after suffering. Whether Kim still held those early beliefs closely or not, the imagery resonated. To become the sun suggested guidance, renewal, a force that could warm and lead. In the harsh world of guerrilla camps, cold nights, hunger, constant danger, such a name offered inspiration both to himself and to those who followed him. It was around this time, in the mid-1930s, as he led small units in raids and built his reputation as a commander, that the name took hold. Comrades began to use it. Word spread among Korean fighters in Manchuria, and soon it became the one by which he was known. The old name, Kim Song-ju, faded into the background, the reminder of the village boy, while Kim Il-sung stepped forward as the emerging leader, bold, determined, carrying the hopes of many. This change was more than words. It marked a shift in how he saw himself and how others began to see him. In the resistance, where trust and courage were everything, a strong name could rally people, give them something to believe in during long, hard nights. Kim embraced it fully, and it stayed with him for the rest of his life, growing into something far larger than he could have imagined in those early days. Reflecting on this moment brings a quiet tenderness. We all know times when we choose a new path, a new way of being, perhaps a new role in the family, a new responsibility at work, a new purpose after hardship. Names, titles, or even the way we carry ourselves can mark those turning points. For Kim, adopting this name was one such marker, leaving behind the child of Namni, stepping into the man who would fight for his people's future. It touches the heart to think of the young fighter in the forests, choosing a name that meant light and rising, holding on to hope
when the world felt dark. His family's early faith may have planted seeds of that imagery, light overcoming shadow, even if the path later led far from those Sunday hymns. We may look at his life with mixed feelings, but we can feel understanding for the young man seeking to become something greater than his circumstances, choosing a name that carried promise and purpose. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the moments when people reach for light in difficult times, and for the names we choose that help define who we hope to become.
Let's now move gently forward into the years when Kim Song-ju, soon to be known as Kim Il-sung, stepped more deeply into the world of communist politics in China, a path that would shape not only his own life, but the future of his homeland. By the late 1920s, the young man was already living in Manchuria, far from the village of his birth, surrounded by Korean exiles who shared his longing for a free Korea. Jilin Province, where he attended UN Middle School, was a place of many ideas. Korean teachers, Chinese revolutionaries, and travelers spoke of change, of ending empires, of justice for workers and peasants, of a new world where the weak would no longer be crushed. These conversations stirred something in him. Kim had grown up with his family's Presbyterian faith, teachings of right and wrong, of caring for the oppressed, of hope in something greater. In China, he began to hear another voice, communism. It spoke of class struggle, of ordinary people rising against those who held power, of unity across borders to defeat imperialism. To Kim, this seemed a powerful way to fight Japan, not just with prayers and quiet resistance, but with organized strength, with a clear plan for a new society. He joined study groups and youth circles tied to the Chinese Communist Party. These were small, earnest gatherings, young people reading Marx, discussing Lenin, sharing news of uprisings in China and beyond. Kim spoke up in those meetings, sharing what he knew of Korea's suffering under Japan, of the March 1st movement, of the need for independence. His words carried weight. He was thoughtful, determined, and carried the quiet fire of someone who had seen his people's pain firsthand. In 1929, at 17, his growing activity led to arrest by Chinese authorities who were under pressure from Japan to suppress radicals. Several months in prison followed, cold cells, hard questions, time to think. He emerged more committed, seeing communism not as a foreign idea, but as a tool for Korea's liberation. By 1931, he formally joined the Chinese Communist Party, believing it offered the best path to oppose Japan and build a just society. Those years in China were a time of learning and hardening. The country was torn by civil war, communists against nationalists, warlords, and the growing threat of Japan. Kim moved among Korean communists in Manchuria, giving speeches, organizing small groups, urging unity against the common enemy. He impressed older comrades with his clarity and courage. His faith from childhood may have faded or blended into these new beliefs, but the core remained, a deep sense of justice, a refusal to accept oppression, a willingness to stand for his people. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931, sparked by a staged incident, changed everything. Manchuria became Manchukuo, a puppet state under Japanese control. Korean resistance fighters faced new dangers, but Kim stayed in the fight.
He saw the communists as the strongest force against imperialism, and he threw himself into their work: raids, propaganda, building networks among Koreans in exile. It was during these years that the seeds of leadership took root. He learned to speak to crowds, to organize under pressure, to endure hardship without complaint. The boy from Namli was becoming a man who could rally others, who carried the pain of his homeland in his voice. Reflecting on this time brings a quiet tenderness. We remember our own youth, the ideas that first stirred us, the teachers or friends who opened new worlds, the moment we decided to stand for something larger than ourselves. Kim's involvement in communist politics in China was one such turning point. A young exile finding a cause, blending the faith of his childhood with the fire of revolution, stepping forward when many stayed silent. We may not share his later choices, but we can feel understanding for the young man in a foreign land, seeking a way to free his people, learning that change often comes through struggle and conviction. Let's carry that gentle reflection forward as we continue his story, thankful for the early fires that shape a life and the courage it takes to follow a difficult path.
Let's now step carefully into one of the most intense chapters of Kim's early life, the years when he took up guerrilla warfare against Japanese forces, fighting in the forests and mountains of Manchuria and along the Korean border. By the mid-1930s, Kim Il-sung, as he now called himself, had become a committed fighter in the Korean resistance. Japan's grip had tightened. Manchuria was turned into the puppet state of Manchukuo. Korea remained under harsh colonial rule, and the Japanese army hunted down anyone who opposed them. For Kim and his comrades, open battle was impossible. They had no army, no heavy weapons, only determination and the rough terrain of the borderlands. Guerrilla warfare suited them. Small groups moved quickly through forests and hills, striking at Japanese patrols, supply lines, and outposts, then disappearing before larger forces could respond. Kim led one such detachment. Young Koreans, some Chinese communists, men and women who lived in hidden camps, shared what little food they had and trusted each other with their lives. They raided police stations, ambushed trucks, disrupted railways, small blows meant to show Japan that resistance was alive. One of the most remembered actions came in June 1937, the Battle of Pochonbo. Kim led about 200 fighters across the Yalu River into northern Korea. They attacked a Japanese police station and other targets in the town, burning buildings and seizing supplies before withdrawing. The raid was small in scale, but large in meaning. It proved Koreans could strike back on their own soil, that the occupiers were not invincible. Word spread quickly, in villages, in exile communities, even among Japanese forces. For Kim, he was now more than a speaker. He was a commander who could lead men into danger and bring them out again. Life as a guerrilla was hard beyond words. Winters in Manchuria were brutal. Deep snow, freezing winds, little shelter. Food was scarce. Fighters lived on wild plants, stolen rice, whatever they could carry. Wounds often went untreated, sickness spread easily, and every day carried the risk of betrayal or ambush. Yet in those camps, bonds formed that were stronger than blood. Comrades shared stories of home, sang old songs, prayed when they could, some still carrying the faith of their families. Kim's leadership grew in these years. He spoke plainly to his fighters, shared their hardships, planned carefully, and never asked them to do what he would not. He earned respect not by force, but by endurance, staying calm in danger, caring for the wounded, keeping hope alive when despair crept close. His early faith may have faded into the background, but the lessons of compassion and justice from childhood stayed. Treat your comrades as brothers. Fight for those who cannot fight. These guerrilla years were a crucible. They taught him strategy, patience, the cost of war. They also built his reputation among Koreans in exile, among Chinese communists, even among the Japanese who put a price on his head. He was no longer just a young organizer. He was a fighter who had seen death close, who had led raids and survived, who carried the dreams of a free Korea in every step. It touches the heart to think of those days. We remember our own stories of struggle, times when loved ones faced danger for what they believed, when ordinary people found extraordinary courage, when hope was kept alive in the hardest places. Kim's guerrilla life echoes that human truth. Young men and women far from home, risking everything for freedom, bound together by shared purpose and quiet loyalty. We may not agree with every choice that followed, but we can feel tenderness for the fighter in the forest, for the comrades who trusted him, for the dream of a free Korea that kept them going through cold and fear. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the courage that rises in dark times and the bonds that hold people together when the world tries to pull them apart.
Let's now step quietly into one of the most pivotal chapters of Kim Il-sung's life, the years of World War II in the Far East and the time he spent under Soviet protection and training, a period that would prepare him for the role he would later play. By the late 1930s, Kim was a marked man. His raids, including the Battle of Pochinbo, had made him a target. Japanese forces hunted him relentlessly across Manchuria, offering rewards for his capture, dead or alive. The forests and mountains that once sheltered him were becoming more dangerous. Patrols grew thicker, informants more common. Survival demanded constant movement, caution, and the loyalty of comrades who shared every hardship. As Japan's war with China escalated in 1937, what many now see as the true beginning of World War II in Asia, the pressure on Korean and Chinese guerrillas intensified. Kim's group continued small attacks, but the tide was turning. The Japanese army, now fully committed to conquering China, poured resources into securing their northern borders. For Kim and his fighters, the fight became one of endurance as much as victory. In the early 1940s, as the wider war spread, Kim and many Korean communists were quietly taken into Soviet territory. The Soviet Union had not yet entered the war against Japan. They were locked in their own desperate struggle against Germany, but they maintained bases and training camps near the borders with China and Korea. These were places of relative safety, hidden in Siberia's vast forests, away from Japanese reach. Kim and his wife, Kim Jong-suk, whom he had married in 1941 or 1942, were among those who crossed over. The Soviet camps offered something new: structure, training, and a chance to rest and rebuild. Kim was assigned to the 88th Separate Rifle Brigade, an international unit made up of Koreans, Chinese, and others who had fought Japan. There, he learned modern military methods, tactics, weapons handling, communications, strategy. Soviet instructors taught discipline, coordination, the use of radios and explosives. For the first time, Kim saw a large, organized army, not small guerrilla bands, but forces with supply lines, medical care, and clear command. Life in the camps was still hard: cold winters, basic rations, the ache of separation from home, but it was different. He trained, planned, and waited. His wife gave birth to their son, Yuri, later known as Kim Jong-il, in 1941 or 1942, a moment of quiet joy amid uncertainty. The family stayed close, even in exile, holding to the values of love and endurance that had carried them so far. These Soviet years were a time of waiting and preparation. Kim learned patience, the value of organization, the importance of alliances. He saw how a powerful state could support a cause, how training could turn fighters into soldiers. When the Soviet Union finally declared war on Japan in August 1945, after Germany's defeat, the Red Army swept into Manchuria in a swift campaign. Kim and his comrades were ready, trained, rested, eager to return. The war's end came quickly. Japan surrendered after the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Soviet forces occupied northern Korea, American forces the south, a temporary division along the 38th parallel that would soon harden into something permanent. For Kim, the Soviet training gave him tools, military knowledge, confidence, connections. He returned to Korea in September 1945, legally this time, not as a hidden fighter, stepping onto soil he had not seen in 25 years. The boy from Nam Ni had become a trained commander, shaped by exile, faith, struggle, and now the lessons of a great power's army. It touches the heart to reflect on those years. We remember times when loved ones waited in hard places, wars, distant jobs, times of uncertainty, holding on to hope, learning, preparing for a future they could not yet see. Kim's Soviet chapter was one of those seasons, away from home, in a strange land, yet growing stronger, keeping family close, dreaming of return. Let's carry that soft understanding forward as we continue his story, grateful for the times when preparation in the shadows leads to light, and for the endurance that brings people home again.
Let's now turn our gentle thoughts to a deeply personal chapter in Kim Il-sung's life, the years of marriage and family during the war, a time of love, hardship, and hope amid the chaos of conflict and exile. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, Kim was deep in the guerrilla struggle against Japan. Life in the forests and mountains of Manchuria was one of constant danger. Hidden camps, sudden raids, long marches through snow and rain. Yet even in such times, the human heart seeks connection, comfort, and something lasting. It was during these years that Kim met and married Kim Jong-suk. She was a young Korean woman, orphaned in the early 1930s after her family fled to Manchuria to escape Japanese rule. Like so many others, she had joined resistance in her late teens, brave, quiet, determined. Stories say she saved Kim from an assassination attempt by Japanese agents, a moment that drew them close. Their bond grew in the shared danger of the fight, two people who understood the cost of freedom, who found strength in each other when the world offered little. They married in 1941 in the midst of war. It was not a grand ceremony, no family gathered, no feast, but a simple promise made in a hidden place, perhaps under the trees or in a safe house. Marriage in such times meant everything, a vow to stand together, to care for one another, to keep hope alive when survival itself was uncertain. Kim Jong-suk became not just his wife, but his comrade, fighting alongside him, sharing the same hardships, carrying the same dream for Korea. Their first child came soon after, a son born in 1941 or 1942, named Yuri Irsonovich Kim, a name that reflected the Soviet protection they were under at the time. The birth was a quiet joy in a world of struggle.
A baby in a guerrilla camp was rare and precious, a reminder that life continued, that the future they fought for would have faces and laughter. Later accounts adjusted the place and time to Korea itself, but the truth remains, a baby born in exile, to parents who carried the weight of war, yet still dreamed of home. 2 more children followed in the mid-1940s, a boy, Kim Man-il, and a daughter, Kim Kyung-hui, born as the war raged on. Kim Jong-suk cared for them with the same steady love she gave to the fight. She nursed them in hidden places, shielded them from danger, taught them small songs and stories when she could. For Kim, family was an anchor. Amid raids and training, he returned to them when possible, a father who held his children close, a husband who found comfort in his wife's quiet strength. Tragically, Kim Jong-suk's life was short. She died in the autumn of 1949, in her early 30s. The cause is not fully clear. Perhaps complications from pregnancy, perhaps the toll of years as a guerrilla fighter, cold, hunger, wounds, endless strain. Her death left a deep wound. Kim mourned her privately, raising the children with the help of family and comrades, carrying her memory as part of his own story. These war years of marriage and family were a blend of tenderness and trial. Love bloomed in the shadow of danger. Children were born where safety was scarce. A wife fought beside her husband until her strength gave out. It reminds us of so many families in wartime, holding tight to one another when the world falls apart, finding joy in small moments, enduring loss with quiet resolve. It touches the heart to think of them, a young couple vowing their lives together in a forest camp, a mother cradling her baby amid gunfire echoes, a father returning from raids to hold his children. These were human moments in an inhuman time, proof that even in war, love persists, family endures, hope is born anew. We may not agree with every path that followed, but we can feel tenderness for the husband and wife who faced danger side by side, for the children born in exile, for the love that held them through the storm. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the families that give us strength and the quiet courage that keeps hearts beating even in the darkest nights.
Let's now move forward with quiet respect to the days immediately after the war ended, the post-war occupation of Korea, a time when the peninsula stood at a crossroads and the man who had fought as a guerrilla began to step into a far larger role. In August 1945, Japan surrendered. The atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had ended the war in the Pacific, and Soviet forces, honoring their agreement with the Allies, entered Manchuria and then moved south into northern Korea. American troops landed in the south. The division was meant to be temporary, a line drawn at the 38th parallel simply to accept Japanese surrender, but it quickly became something more. The North fell under Soviet influence, the South under American. 2 occupying powers, 2 visions of the future, one land torn in 2. Kim Il-sung returned to Korea in September 1945, the first time in 25 years he had walked the soil legally, not as a hidden fighter slipping across borders. He arrived in Pyongyang, a city scarred by war but alive with hope. The Soviets, who now controlled the North, were looking for leaders they could trust, men who understood communism, who had fought Japan, who could help build a new order. Among the many Koreans who had spent years in exile, Kim stood out. He had trained with the Soviets, spoken their language of revolution, proven himself in battle. Soviet officers, including those from security services, met with him,
listened, and decided he was the one. In late 1945, Kim was named head of the Communist Party in the North and soon became the leading figure in the Soviet-occupied zone. It was a strange position for him. He had spent most of his life in China and Russia. His Korean, rusty from years away, needed practice. Yet the Soviets saw in him a reliable ally, disciplined, experienced, committed to their cause. They helped him build structures, a provisional administration, local committees, steps toward a new government. The North began to change quickly. Land was taken from Japanese collaborators and large owners, given to peasants. Factories once run by Japan were nationalized. Education and healthcare expanded under communist principles. The Soviets brought advisors, engineers, and supplies to rebuild what war had broken. Kim worked closely with them, learning how a state could be organized, how power could be held firmly. His early faith had long faded, but the lessons of discipline from his youth remained, now applied to building a new system. In the South, Americans supported a different path. Elections were planned, non-communist leaders rose, and Syngman Rhee emerged as a strong figure. Tensions grew between North and South, between Moscow and Washington. The temporary line at the 38th parallel began to harden. Families were divided, friends separated, hopes for one Korea fading. For Kim, these post-war months were a time of transformation. The guerrilla fighter became a statesman, meeting with Soviet generals, speaking to crowds, shaping policies that would define the North. He married again in 1952 to Kim Song-ae, and family life continued amid the work of building a nation. His children from the first marriage grew up knowing their father as a leader now, not just a fighter in the hills. It touches the heart to reflect on those days. We remember times when our own countries faced division or occupation, when hope for unity clashed with the reality of great powers drawing lines, when ordinary people watched their future being decided far away. Kim's return and rise in the North was one man's journey through that storm, from exile and war to the responsibility of leading a half-nation, carrying the dreams of many who longed for a free Korea. We may not agree with the choices made or the paths taken, but we can feel tenderness for the man stepping onto familiar soil after so many years away, for the families divided by a line on a map, for the quiet hope that somehow, one day, the land could heal. Let's carry that soft understanding forward as we continue his story, grateful for the moments when history turns and ordinary lives are swept into greater currents, yet still shaped by the same human longing for home and belonging.
Let's now walk with quiet reverence into the years when Kim Il-sung rose to power in North Korea, a time when a guerrilla fighter from exile became the leader of a new nation, shaping its future with firm hands and a vision that would last decades. In September 1945, Kim stepped back onto Korean soil after 25 years away. Pyongyang greeted him not as a boy from Namni, but as a commander who had fought Japan, trained with Soviets, and carried the hopes of many who longed for a free Korea. The Soviet occupation in the North needed a leader they could trust, someone committed to communism, experienced in struggle, able to organize and inspire. Among the exiles and local figures, Kim stood out. Soviet officers met with him, listened to his plans, and saw in him a man who could build what they envisioned, a socialist state aligned with Moscow. By late 1945, he was named head of the Communist Party in the North and soon became chairman of the Provisional People's Committee, the body that acted as the early government. His rise was swift but deliberate. The Soviets helped him consolidate power. They removed rivals, supported his policies, and gave him the tools to build institutions. Kim moved carefully. He spoke to crowds in simple language, promising land for peasants, education for children, justice for workers. People who had suffered under Japan listened. Many saw in him a son of Korea who had never stopped fighting. The North changed quickly under his guidance. Land was redistributed from Japanese collaborators and large owners to tenant farmers, a promise kept that won loyalty in villages. Factories once run by Japan were placed under state control. Schools opened, teaching literacy and communist ideals. Health clinics appeared in rural areas. Kim worked long hours, meeting with advisors, inspecting projects, speaking directly to people. His early life, the faith of his parents, the discipline of resistance showed in his style, steady, organized, unyielding. Tensions with the South grew. In 1948, the Republic of Korea formed below the 38th parallel under Syngman Rhee. The North responded by proclaiming the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on September 9, 1948, with Kim as its first premier. The division was now official. Two governments, two paths, one people split by a line drawn by distant powers. Kim's power rested on several pillars. He built alliances with Soviet and Chinese communists, secured military aid, and created loyalty through reform. He spoke of unity, of one Korea under socialist rule, and many in the North believed him. His family remained close. His second wife, Kim Song-ae, whom he married in 1952, and his children grew up seeing their father as leader of a new nation. Personal life stayed private, but the family anchor held firm amid the demands of state building. These early years as leader were a time of hope mixed with hardness. Kim believed he was fulfilling the dream of independence, ending colonial rule, lifting the poor, creating a society where justice prevailed. But power brought choices. Central control grew. Opposition was silenced. The state became the center of life. The man who had fought for freedom now shaped a system where freedom looked different. It touches the heart to reflect on such beginnings. We remember leaders in our own histories, those who rose from struggle to guide a nation, who carried the hopes of many, who faced the weight of decisions that affected millions. Kim's rise echoes that human story, a son of exile returning home, taking responsibility for a broken land, dreaming of a better future, even as the road grew narrow. We may not agree with every step or every choice, but we can feel understanding for the man who stood at that crossroads, for the families who believed in him, for the hope that a new nation could heal old wounds. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the moments when history calls ordinary people to extraordinary roles, and for the dreams that guide them, even when the road becomes difficult.
Let's now turn our thoughts with quiet respect to one of the most sorrowful yet defining moments in modern Korean history, the armistice that ended the active fighting of the Korean War and the long aftermath that followed. A time of rebuilding, hardening division, and the steady shaping of North Korea under Kim Il-sung's hand. The war had raged for 3 years, from June 1950 to July 1953, leaving the peninsula in ruins. Cities were rubble, villages burned, families torn apart, millions dead or wounded on both sides. No side had won the unification they sought. The front lines had shifted back and forth, but by early 1951, they settled near the 38th parallel, the same line that had divided the land after World War II. The fighting became a bitter stalemate. Trench warfare, artillery duels, cold winters, endless small battles that gained little ground but cost many lives. By 1951, even Kim Il-sung began to see the war could not be won quickly. Soviet and Chinese archives show he quietly pressed for a way to end the fighting, not surrender, but a pause that would let the North survive and rebuild. Talks began in Kaesong, then moved to Panmunjom. They dragged on for 2 years, arguments over prisoners, borders, the future of Korea, while the guns never fully fell silent. Chinese troops who had entered to save the North suffered heavily. American and UN forces held firm. South Korea, under Syngman Rhee, wanted to keep fighting for total victory. Finally, on July 27, 1953, the Korean armistice agreement was signed. No peace treaty followed, only a ceasefire. The line stayed near the 38th, widened into a demilitarized zone 4 kilometers wide, guarded by both sides. Prisoners were exchanged, but the war technically never ended. To this day, the 2 Koreas remain in a state of armistice, no formal peace, only a tense truce. For Kim, the armistice was a bitter outcome. He had launched the war to unify Korea under his rule. Instead, the North survived, but remained half a nation, scarred and dependent on Soviet and Chinese aid. Yet, he presented it as a victory. The imperialist forces had been stopped, the socialist state preserved. In Pyongyang, the story became of heroic defense, Kim as the wise leader who had saved the revolution. The aftermath was a time of rebuilding and tightening control. The North lay in devastation, factories destroyed, farms empty, cities leveled. Kim turned to reconstruction with the same determination he had shown in war. Soviet engineers, Chinese help, and the labor of the people rebuilt roads, bridges, power plants. Land reform continued, industries nationalized further, education expanded. The state became the center of life, providing jobs, food rations, schools, but also demanding loyalty. Kim used the war's memory to strengthen his position. Statues rose, songs praised his leadership, history books told of his genius in saving the nation. The cult of personality deepened. He was the father who had protected his children through fire. Juche ideas began to take clearer shape: self-reliance, Korean pride, distrust of foreign powers, born partly from the war's lessons. Allies had helped, but only Kim could be fully trusted. Life for ordinary people was hard. Scars of war remained: orphans, widows, hunger in the early years. Yet there was also a sense of shared purpose, rebuilding together, defending the revolution, believing in the leader who had stood with them. Kim's family grew. His second marriage to Kim Song-ae brought stability at home, but public life centered on the state he led. It touches the heart to reflect on those days. We remember the aftermath of wars in our own histories, the ruins, the grief, the slow work of healing, the hope that tomorrow would be better. Korea's armistice brought no full peace, only a pause filled with both rebuilding and new burdens.
Kim's role in that time was to guide a wounded nation forward, holding it together through will, vision, and unyielding control. We may not agree with every choice or every method, but we can feel tenderness for a people emerging from war, for a leader who saw himself as protector, for the quiet hope that one day the wounds might heal and families might live without fear. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the resilience that rises after conflict and mindful of the delicate balance between unity and freedom that every divided land must seek.
Let's now turn our quiet attention to one of the most defining aspects of Kim Il-sung's long rule, the rise of the cult of personality and the creation of Juche ideology, forces that shaped North Korea's soul and set it apart from other nations. After the Korean War ended in 1953 with an armistice that left the peninsula divided and scarred, Kim returned to Pyongyang as a leader who had survived invasion, foreign armies, and the near collapse of his young state. The war had weakened his position. Many questioned why unification had failed, why so much suffering had come. But it also gave him opportunity. He began to build something new, not just a government, but a system centered on himself as the eternal guide. The cult of personality grew steadily from the late 1940s, but became unmistakable in the 1950s and 1960s. Large statues of Kim appeared in city squares. His portrait hung in every public building and home. He was called Suryong, the great leader, and titles multiplied: great chairman, heavenly leader, the son of the nation. Official histories rewrote the past. Kim's guerrilla raids were portrayed as the decisive force that defeated Japan, almost single-handedly freeing Korea. School books, songs, newspapers, radio broadcasts all repeated the same message. Kim Il-sung was the father of the nation, the wise protector, the source of all progress. This was not accidental. Kim understood the power of symbols and stories. In a land recovering from war, people needed something to believe in, a unifying figure, a promise of security. He became that figure. Parades celebrated his birthday. Children learned songs in his honor. Adults studied his teachings as sacred wisdom. The cult was everywhere. Badges with his image worn on chests, bows before statues, loyalty oaths spoken daily. It created a sense of unity and purpose, but also a deep dependence, the nation's fate tied to one man's will. Closely woven into this was Juche ideology. The word Juche means self-reliance or independence, a concept that emerged in the 1950s and was fully shaped by the 1970s. It began as a practical response to North Korea's position. Caught between the Soviet Union and China, both powerful allies with their own agendas, Kim sought a path that put Korea first. Juche taught that the Korean people must rely on their own strength, their own creativity, their own leader, not foreign models or aid. Over time, Juche grew into something deeper, a worldview that blended nationalism, communism, and reverence for Kim himself. It emphasized the leader as the brain of the nation, the people as the body, and the party as the instrument of will. In 1972, a new constitution formally recognized Juche as the guiding principle. In 1982, the towering Juche Tower rose in Pyongyang, a monument to self-reliance, lit at night like a beacon.
10 Principles, published in 1974, became almost a scripture. Honor the leader, unite under him, build the nation through absolute loyalty. Juche set North Korea apart. While other communist states looked to Moscow or Beijing, Kim insisted Korea must follow its own way, nationalist, self-sufficient, centered on the leader. It gave people pride in their uniqueness, but also justified isolation, heavy military spending, and the rejection of outside ideas. The ideology and the cult became one. Kim was not just ruler, but the living embodiment of Juche, the sun that lit the nation's path. It touches the heart to reflect on how such systems take root. We remember times when nations, wounded by war or hardship, turned to a single figure for guidance, when people needed hope so badly that they placed it in one man's hands. Kim's cult and Juche offered that hope, a promise of strength, independence, dignity after years of foreign rule. For many, it felt like salvation. Yet we also know the other side, the weight it placed on ordinary lives, the demand for total loyalty, the silence it imposed on doubt. Power concentrated in one person can lift a nation in spirit, but also bind it tightly. We may not agree with the path it took, but we can feel understanding for the longing that gave it birth, the desire for self-respect after humiliation, for a leader who seemed to embody the nation's unbreakable will. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the human need to believe in something greater, and mindful of the balance between hope and freedom that every society must seek.
Let's now turn our gentle thoughts to one of the most sobering chapters in Kim Il-sung's rule, the purges that cleared opposition and the creation of the Songbun caste system, mechanisms that ensured his absolute control and reshaped life for every citizen in North Korea. After the armistice in 1953, Kim faced challenges within his own ranks. The war had exposed weaknesses. Some comrades questioned his decisions. Others looked to Moscow or Beijing for guidance, and a few dreamed of a more shared leadership. In a young state still healing from devastation, Kim saw any dissent as a threat, not just to him, but to the revolution he believed he alone could protect. The purges began in earnest in the mid-1950s. In August 1956, during a meeting of the Workers' Party Central Committee, a faction, some trained in the Soviet Union, others with ties to China, openly criticized Kim's style of leadership. They called for collective rule, less central power, more openness. Kim acted swiftly. He rallied loyal supporters, accused the critics of factionalism, and turned the meeting against them. Many were removed from positions, some were imprisoned, others disappeared. This became known as the August Faction Incident. Over the next few years, the sweep widened. By the early 1960s, a quarter of senior party figures had been purged. Some were sent to labor camps, others executed. The message was clear: loyalty to Kim was absolute. No challenge, however small, would be tolerated. Families of the accused often suffered too. Guilt by association became a quiet rule. Kim justified it as protecting the revolution from enemies within, but the effect was to concentrate power entirely in his hands. Closely tied to this was the Songbun caste system, introduced in 1957 and expanded over the decades. Songbun, meaning background or origin, classified every citizen into categories based on their family history, actions during the Japanese occupation, and loyalty to the regime. At its core were three main groups: Hexim, the core, loyal class, revolutionaries, workers, poor peasants, those with clean records; Dongyo, the wavering middle, ordinary people with mixed backgrounds; Choktai, the hostile, former landowners, collaborators with Japan, those with relatives in the south or abroad. Over time, 50 or more subcategories emerged. Files were kept on nearly every person: birth records, family history, behavior at work or school, all feeding into their Songbun status. This determined everything: access to education, jobs, housing, food rations, even where one could live. High Songbun opened doors, low Songbun closed them. Children inherited their parents' status, and changing it was impossible. The system was enforced quietly but ruthlessly. During the 1990s famine, when food was scarce, Hexim families received priority rations, while others starved. Songbun became a silent wall dividing society: loyalty rewarded, suspicion punished. It created a nation where people learned early to watch their words, to prove devotion, to fear any mark against their record. These measures, purges and Songbun, were not born of cruelty alone. Kim believed the state's survival depended on unity under one vision, one leader. After years of exile and war, he saw division as weakness, dissent as danger. The cult of personality and Juche ideology gave these controls a higher purpose: the leader as the nation's brain, the people as one body moving in harmony. It touches the heart to reflect on such a system. We remember times in our own histories when fear of division led to tight control, when leaders, scarred by past loss, demanded absolute loyalty to prevent collapse. For many in North Korea, Songbun and the purges offered a strange security: follow the rules, prove devotion, and life could be bearable. Yet for others, it meant lifelong limits, silenced voices, families broken by a single accusation. We may not agree with the methods or the outcome, but we can feel understanding for the fear that drove it: the fear of losing what had been fought for, the belief that only total unity could protect a wounded nation. Let's carry that soft reflection forward as we continue his story, grateful for the human longing for safety and belonging, and mindful of the high cost when control replaces trust.